himself, Abraham. Now, if you've been to Sunday school even once, you know the story. God, the all-knowing, all-powerful, apparently testing deity, tells Abraham to take his son Isaac, the one through whom all his descendants were promised, and sacrifice him. Not like sacrifice a goat or sacrifice some personal time for charity. No. We're talking a full-blown, take your son up a mountain, tie him down, and stick a knife in him. And Abraham, bless his obedient heart, was like, sure thing, Big G. Whatever you say. Now imagine for a second that this wasn't 4,000 years ago in a desert. Imagine it's last Tuesday in suburban America. A parent, let's just call them Brenda. Brenda wakes up, hears a voice, and tells her family, God told me to take little Timmy up to the local park, tie him to the swing set, and sacrifice him to prove my faith. What happens next? Is Brenda instantly canonized? Does she get a reality TV show? No. Brenda gets a visit from Child Protective Services, a one-way ticket to the nearest psychiatric facility, and likely a long stay in a padded room with a gentle nurse asking if she'd like some more juice. She would be deemed suffering from a severe mental illness, possibly religious delusions and auditory hallucinations. No one would be commending her willingness to kill her child. They'd be trying to keep Timmy alive and Brenda away from sharp objects. And that, my friends, is where the rubber meets the road. Why is Abraham, who was literally about to murder his son based on an alleged divine command, lauded as a hero of faith, a paragon of obedience, and a shining example for believers, while Brenda would be universally condemned as a danger to herself and society, clearly unhinged? The legal system even has a term for this kind of defense, though it's almost always unsuccessful. It's called the deific decree defense. It's when someone argues that they committed a crime because they were compelled by a divine authority and therefore couldn't distinguish right from wrong. In other words, God made me do it. Courts, being somewhat grounded in reality, typically view these claims not as genuine divine mandates, but as symptoms of severe mental illnesses like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, often characterized by grandiose religious delusions and intense auditory hallucinations, hearing voices believed to be God. So when Christians today look at Abraham's story, they see a test of faith, a moment of profound spiritual significance. When a modern forensic psychologist looks at it, they see a potentially psychotic individual experiencing command hallucinations, thankfully interrupted by an external stimulus, the angel, that prevented a tragic outcome. The only difference is the time frame and the cultural context, which we'll see makes all the difference. But should it? Should our understanding of mental health and ethical behavior just vanish when we crack open a dusty old book? I think not. So, okay, let's move on to another biblical superstar, Moses. This guy famously has a chat with God through a burning bush that isn't consumed. A bush that talks. And not just any chat. A chat where God gives him marching orders to confront Pharaoh and lead an entire nation out of slavery. Now again, let's update this. Let's say you're hiking in Yellowstone and you see a bush on fire, but it's not burning. It's not burning up. And then it starts talking to you, telling you to go confront the president about some national policy. What do? Do you immediately pack your bags, buy a staff, and demand a face-to-face with the leader of the free world? Or do you perhaps call park rangers, then maybe your therapist, and definitely an ophthalmologist? Moses' experience in a modern clinical context screams visual and auditory hallucinations. Seeing something that isn't really there, hearing voices that aren't external. These are classic symptoms of psychotic disorders, and while ancient cultures, lacking any understanding of neurology or psychology, might have interpreted such experiences as divine communication, we, with our MRI machines and our DSM-5, have a slightly more nuanced understanding. But here's where it gets really interesting with Moses. The group dynamic. Now, I do not believe a Moses existed or the Exodus actually happened. But let's talk about the Moses as the Bible portrays him. So in the biblical Moses. So let's talk about the biblical Moses as the Bible portrays him. He, who doesn't just have these experiences in isolation, he then convinces an entire nation, hundreds of thousands of people, to follow him based on these divine instructions. They follow him through a desert for 40 years, relying entirely on his pronouncements and alleged direct line to God. He produces miracles that, to an objective observer, might look like natural phenomena or well-timed coincidences, or perhaps even skilled trickery. But to the faithful, they are undeniable proof of his divine authority. This, my friends, brings us to the fascinating concept of group delusions, or collective psychosis. This isn't just about mass hysteria. It's a shared false belief or a distorted perception of reality that spreads through a group, where individuals conform to the idea because they believe most others agree, even if they don't truly believe it themselves. It often originates with a dominant individual who might have a psychotic disorder, and then, through intense emotional bonds, isolation from external reality, and a strong leader-follower dynamic, the delusion takes hold. Think about it. Moses, the dominant individual, experiences hallucinations. He's absolutely convinced. He then uses his charisma, his conviction, and the desperation of a newly freed people to propagate his beliefs. They are isolated in the desert, away from dissenting voices or alternative perspectives. They are emotionally bonded by a shared experience of oppression and the hope of deliverance. Perfect breeding ground for a group delusion. Imagine the notes a modern psychologist would write. And here's an example. Patient M exhibits grandiose delusions, command hallucinations, and appears to be inducing a shared delusional disorder among a large, vulnerable population. Recommendation: Separate patient M from the group immediately for individual assessment and psychiatric intervention. The prognosis for the group is generally good if the dominant individual is removed. But no, in the Bible, this isn't a red flag. It's proof. Proof of God's chosen leader. Proof of miraculous intervention. It's the foundation of a major world religion. The absurdity, it practically writes itself. Now for the big one, the main event, the central figure of Christianity himself, Jesus of Nazareth. If Abraham and Moses present compelling cases for psychiatric evaluation, Jesus, by many accounts, practically screams for a diagnostic manual. Let's just be clear up front. I'm not here to say Jesus definitely had a mental illness, if he even ever existed at all. And if he had existed, he was only a man and not divine. What you would know as a historical Jesus, nothing divine. But I'm here to say that if we apply the same yardstick we use for anyone else in the modern world without the pre-existing belief that he was divine, then his reported behaviors and claims fit disturbingly well into categories we understand as symptoms of severe mental health conditions. Prophet syndrome isn't an official medical diagnosis, but it's a descriptive term that perfectly encapsulates a cluster of symptoms. Severe religious delusions, where an individual exhibits intense grandiosity, believing they are a prophet, a messiah, or the direct recipient of divine messages. And these aren't just passing thoughts. These are rigid, hyper-religious beliefs that dominate their reality. Such beliefs are, in a modern clinical setting, classic symptoms of underlying psychiatric conditions, most commonly schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. And what do we see in the biblical accounts of Jesus? Oh boy, where do we even begin? Claiming to be the Son of God, equal to God, the Savior of humanity, the resurrection and the life, the only way to the Father. These are not modest claims. If I walked out of my apartment door tomorrow and declared myself as some type of Messiah here to save you all, you wouldn't be bowing down. You'd be calling the guys in the white coats. And for the record, I'd probably deserve it. And remember Jesus' baptism? A voice from heaven says, "You are my beloved Son. With you I am well pleased," as it says in Mark chapter 1, verse 11. The Transfiguration? Another voice from a cloud says, "This is my Son, whom I love. Listen to him." In Mark chapter 9, verse 7. Now a believer says, "Aha! God speaking." A skeptic says, "Aha! Auditory hallucinations." The problem is, as an objective observer, we have no way to verify the former, but we have a well-documented medical explanation for the latter. So this is perhaps the most damning pieces of textual evidence. In Mark chapter 3, verse 21, it says, "When his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, 'He is out of his mind.'" Think about that. Jesus' own family, the people who knew him best, thought he was nuts. They weren't saying, "Oh, he's just really passionate about his ministry." They were really saying, he's lost his marbles. We need to intervene. This isn't just an interpretation. It's explicitly stated in the text. This sounds suspiciously like a family trying to get help for a loved one experiencing a psychotic break or severe mental health crisis. Jesus had unusual behaviors, such as driving out demons, which we now understand as various physical and mental illnesses, wandering in the desert for 40 days, speaking in parables that often confused even his closest followers. While some can be explained allegorically, others, when viewed clinically, seem, unusual. If Jesus were to walk into a modern emergency room presenting with these symptoms, claims of divinity, hearing voices from the sky, making impossible pronouncements, and having his family explicitly state he's out of his mind, no doctor would send him out to start a ministry. They'd initiate a psychiatric evaluation, possibly administer antipsychotic medication or mood stabilizers, and recommend psychotherapy. The goal would be to manage the source disorder, to bring him back to a shared reality, not to help him gather disciples. And then there's the group delusion element again, but even more pronounced with Jesus. He primarily hung out with his 12 disciples, a small insular group. They traveled together, shared intense experiences, and were constantly exposed to his charismatic personality and unwavering conviction. This is the perfect environment for a shared delusional system to flourish. The dominant individual, in this case being Jesus, with his potential psychotic disorder. The subordinates, in this case being Jesus' disciples, with strong emotional bonds, isolation from dissenting views, and the intense pressure to believe and conform. If one disciple started to doubt, the collective pressure of the others, and that of Jesus himself, would likely quickly bring them back into line. Peter's denial, of course, for example, could be seen as a brief moment of breaking from the delusion, only to be pulled back in by guilt and the group dynamic. Consider the treatment. If you want to break a group delusion, the most effective method is physical separation of the dominant individual from the others. Imagine if, instead of being crucified, Jesus had been gently but firmly separated from his disciples and put into a therapeutic environment. What would have happened to the beliefs of the disciples? History suggests they likely would have faded, just as most cults and shared delusions dissipate when the central figure is removed. Because of the dramatic ending, the legend cemented and the delusion propagated. The irony, the sheer laugh-out-loud absurdity is that Christians today still cling to these narratives as literal truth, as undeniable proofs of divinity, while simultaneously, if any modern individual displayed identical behaviors, they would be immediately referred for mental health intervention. It's a selective application of reality that borders on comedic genius. So why this massive discrepancy? Why do we have one understanding for the ancients and a totally different one for ourselves here in modern day? It fundamentally boils down to contrasting cultural contexts, worldviews, and criteria for interpreting profound human experiences. In biblical times, and even long after, people were largely ignorant of how the brain worked, how the body functioned, or the complex interplay of biology, environment, and psychology. If someone exhibited a vision or heard voices, there weren't medical textbooks to consult. There wasn't an MRI machine to scan for brain anomalies. There wasn't even a basic understanding of neurochemistry. So what was left? The supernatural. So when someone claimed to hear God, or see angels, or have prophetic dreams, it wasn't dismissed as delusion. It was often embraced as divine communication. Societies then had specific, albeit flawed, criteria to discern true prophets from false ones, like message alignment with existing traditions or the accuracy of predictions. But the fundamental premise that such experiences could be divine was largely undisputed. In fact, many cultures valued such experiences as signs of spiritual giftedness. Fast forward to today. We live in an age of scientific inquiry, medical advancement, and a progressively more secular worldview. We understand that the brain is an incredibly complex organ, capable of producing all sorts of experiences, from vivid dreams to full-blown hallucinations, without any external divine input. We have disciplines like psychiatry, neurology, and psychology dedicated to understanding and treating these phenomena. Hearing voices today is not generally celebrated as a sign of divine favor. It's recognized as a symptom of psychosis, linked to conditions like schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, severe depression, trauma, or substance abuse. While not always a sign of severe mental illness, it always warrants professional evaluation and often requires intervention, whether through medication, talking therapies, or coping strategies like distraction or support groups. So here's the kicker. The exact same behaviors, the exact same claims, the exact same internal experiences, the ones that led biblical figures to be hailed as prophets and messengers of God, would, if they occurred today, lead to a diagnosis, a treatment plan, and potentially a stay in a psychiatric facility. The only thing that has changed is our understanding of the human condition and the brain. The behaviors themselves are timeless. It's like looking at ancient medical practices. If someone used leeches and bloodletting to cure an illness 2,000 years ago, we understand that was the best science they had at the time. We don't continue to promote bloodletting today. So why do we continue to promote ancient interpretations of mental phenomena when we have vastly superior scientific models? It's a selective embrace of modernity, isn't it? We love our smartphones and our antibiotics, but when it comes to questioning the psychological foundations of our religious texts, suddenly we're back in the pre-Enlightenment era. We can identify, diagnose, and treat conditions that would have been completely mysterious in ancient times. We've literally mapped the brain's pathways, understood neurotransmitters, and developed therapies that bring immense relief to suffering individuals. And on the other hand, We have millions, if not billions, of people in the modern world who, despite all this knowledge, continue to believe that Abraham's willingness to kill his son, Moses' talking bush, and Jesus' messianic claims and auditory hallucinations were all literal, divinely guided events. Think about the mental gymnastics required. You can acknowledge that someone today claiming God told them to harm their child is dangerously delusional, but Abraham was just passing a test. You can agree that hearing voices from a burning bush is a sign of psychosis, but Moses was just communing with the divine. You can send someone claiming to be the Son of God, hearing celestial voices, and whose own family thought he was out of his mind, to a psychiatric ward. But Jesus was just performing miracles. It's a double standard so glaring, so profoundly illogical, that it would be a tragedy if it weren't so amusingly absurd. It's as if modern religious belief comes with a built-in ancient times filter that magically transforms all symptoms of mental illness into signs of divine favor. The only reason Christians continue to view these biblical leaders as prophets, as divinely guided, is because their belief system demands it, not because it stands up to any rigorous, objective scrutiny. It's a testament to the power of inherited belief and cognitive dissonance, not to divine truth. The revered prophets become potential patients. The divine commands become command hallucinations. The miraculous events become symptoms of severe mental illness or the fertile ground for group delusions. The truly bewildering part is not that ancient people believed these things. It's that in the 21st century, with all our scientific literacy, our neurological insights, and our ability to treat mental illness, millions of people still cling to these ancient interpretations, effectively turning a blind eye to every advancement in human understanding when it conflicts with their sacred texts. It's time for a reality check. If a behavior is considered evidence of severe mental illness today, it was evidence of severe mental illness back then too. The only thing that's changed is our ability to identify it and to continue to exalt figures for behaviors that we would now classify and treat, while simultaneously condemning similar behaviors in our contemporaries. Isn't faith. It's a selective delusion, a willful ignorance, and frankly, a bit of a joke. So the next time someone tells you about Abraham's faith, or Moses' burning bush, or Jesus' divine claims, instead of reaching for your Bible, maybe just grab a copy of the DSM-5. You might find it sheds a much clearer and certainly more humorous light on these ancient tales. If you enjoyed this dive into the delightful absurdity of religious belief, hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what other biblical tales you think deserve a modern psychological evaluation. And if you enjoy this podcast, please consider supporting it by making a $3 monthly donation by going to my Patreon and becoming a member. Remember, not all voices in your head are divine. Some just need a doctor.